Hello, welcome or welcome back. I'm Ari, and in today's video I am reading my January arcs. Now, at the time I am recording this intro, I have 3 arcs to read. I have requested a few more and haven't gotten denied or approved for them, so I don't honestly know if this video is going to be just the 3 books that I have or if I'm going to add some more to it. But the 3 books that I have are Obsidian by Sarah Daly. This book follows a character named Shade Knox, who is a wanted criminal, but it seems like the only crime she's actually committed from her long list of accusations is dressing like a man. She is something called a blood mage, and that involves swords and tattoos, which I'm down with. And her people live in like a wasteland or a desert, and they need her protection and for her to give them something called a veil in order to continue surviving out in the wasteland. And the reason I grabbed this book, it was not so much for the premise, but the cover of this book is freaking gorgeous. So hopefully the premise of the book lives up to this cover. The next book that I have is a novella, and that is Servant Mage by Kate Elliott. This book is about the mage, I guess. She's a lamplighter, and she has the ability to create light with magic, and she's also an indentured servant. So the fact that we have an indentured servant in mage form, when mages are usually like the top of the food chain in fantasy, seemed like a really interesting premise. And I was like, it's short and it sounds really cool, so let's read this one too. The final book that I have is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, and this, from my understanding, is a like post-apocalyptic novel in the vein of something like Cloud Atlas, where it follows characters through like hundreds of years of time, where we see like major sweeping changes to society and the planet in general. This book seems to cover both climate change and some sort of like released plague, like a preserved body of some ancient woman is found in the ice, and she had died of a plague, and unburying her released that plague, and then this is like the whole fallout of everybody in the world dying to the plague. So I'm a little skeptical about this because we're kind of living through a plague right now, and it makes books about plagues a little bit harder to stomach, but this is one of people's most anticipated reads of the year, so if I don't read it now, I'll probably have to read it later, and the few reviews I have seen of this so far speak nothing but highly of it. So hopefully it's good, and this one I don't think is very long either. I think it's around 300 pages. But those are the 3 books we're going to be covering for sure in this video, and then if there's any other books, you'll see them later. Anyway, let's get into the first book. Alright, so let's talk about Obsidian by Sarah Daly. The first thing I want to do is talk about how amazingly gorgeous this cover is, because this is probably going to be one of the only things you hear me say positive about this book, but oh my god, beautiful cover. Next, I want to talk about the premise, because the premise that they give online I don't think really fits what this book is about. This universe is a fantasy dystopian universe where hundreds, potentially thousands of years ago, 2 warring races fought, and both races were completely destroyed. But the shadows or spirits of the demons have kind of haunt this land almost, and everything in the world is just like a desolate waste. Animals are corrupted, plant life can't live, and the only way that humans have found to survive is to create these things called veils, which are kind of like bubbles of magic that surround cities. Now, the creation of the veils was entrusted to basically a church. And this church over the centuries has become corrupted, and they basically control the wealth of this land and access to the veils. A new veil hasn't been created in 100 years, but one of our main characters, because the premise you get online makes it seem like there's only one main character, but there's like multiple perspectives in the book. But one of our main characters, Shade, is part of a group of like nomads who wander the waste, and there are like veins of some sort of gemstone that you can travel along and not be corrupted by the waste. But those gemstones are slowly becoming more and more corrupted, and they need a veil of their own. And so Shay is setting out to create her own veil. She also has help from an emissary from the Empire whose name is Raiden, and a like prince of the land that she lives in, like a local prince named Dante, as well as a cast of other characters that you will get introduced to as you read. So the premise and the cover of this book are gorgeous, but the book itself isn't great. Sarah Daly's writing is adequate, but completely uninspired. She writes... She's just not a very good writer. And this is one of those books where the entire time you're reading it, you're consciously aware that you were reading a book. It's very, very hard to just like slip into this story because the author's just not a very good storyteller. The words and the phrasing she uses constantly reminds you that you're reading something. The story itself doesn't feel very original, and I think she overdid it with the cast of characters. So we've got like the church, we've got like the mafia, you've got demons, you've got an empire, you've got local lordlings, you've got magical beings that may or may not be extinct as they say they are, and an underground cult. It's just the bad guys thing is a little too overdone. You could have easily left out groups of these people, like the underground cult didn't really need to exist. The mafia characters 100% did not need to exist. That could have just been completely edited out because they didn't do anything. A lot of the underground cult plot lines could have been given to the church. The empire and the local nobles could have been combined into one, in both sections of political rulers, which don't really rule anything because the church rules everything, and then the mafia grants protection. Like it does it. It's too complicated, too built up, and is completely unnecessary and just doesn't make any sense when you think about it. Speaking of things that don't make sense, the story has a lot of plot holes. The world building just isn't complete. And a lot of questions aren't answered, and then sometimes things happen that don't make any sense within the realm that's been set up by this world. A lot of that has to do with like the magic system. We're told many times that Shade, who's our main character, is like a witch or an abomination because she's a woman practicing men's magic. But there seems to be a lot of women who could do this. And people only like really question and hate Shade for it, which it just isn't explained clearly and doesn't really make any sense at all. And there doesn't seem to be a reason why this should be men's magic when obviously women have no issues practicing it. And there's not any cause or reason for the misogyny in that particular part of the plot line. Anyway, this isn't like the worst book I've ever read. It was a fairly quick read, and the story was kind of like an interesting story told by a bad storyteller. So I gave this 3 stars because I didn't hate it. It wasn't awful. It was just mediocre. It was very, very mediocre. And I looked at a lot of other reviews for it, and a lot of people seem to have the same issues with this book as I do, where the writing just isn't good. But I would love to see a story like this in the hands of a better writer. Anyway, moving on to the next arc. Alright, I did just finish Servant Mage by Kate Elliott, and I have a little bit of a cold, so please bear with me when my voice sounds awful. Is it COVID? Who knows, because it's impossible to get tested, but I am triple vaxxed. I won't leave the house for the next 15 days, and neither will my partner, and we're just gonna stay all cuddled up nicely. He is not sick. I am sick. He is not sick. So I think it's just a cold, but we're taking precautions like it's COVID. Anyway, other than wrecking my voice, I did finish Servant Mage by Kate Elliott, and this is a very interesting universe and something that I've never seen done before, but I love it now that it's been done. And that's how this universe treats mages, is mages are usually like all-powerful beings who just lord over everything or live separately, but whatever they do, they're always very high up and very in control. And in this universe, they're all servants. So, usually against their will. And in this universe, they're all slaves. It says servant mage because you're technically an indentured servant, but that's slavery. In this book, we follow a character named Phelan, who is a fire mage, or as she's called here, a lamplighter. And her basic duties, outside of, cleaning the toilets, is to create lamps to light the inn or tavern or wherever she works. One day, a group of rebels show up and free her from her indentured servitude because they need a powerful lamplighter to save some of their people trapped in like a mine system, and she agrees to do it in exchange for falsified papers that will let her travel back to her home. And while they're leaving the city that Phelan's from, they end up going on another adventure to save a magical baby. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about the plot of the story because it's a very, very short novella. After I finished writing my review, I read some other reviews, and a lot of people were complaining that it was a novella, but it's like under 200 pages. Of course it's a novella. So if you're gonna go into this, understand that this is a novella. What it felt like to me is kind of almost like a prequel novel or a world-building novel, where I don't know if this is going to be part of a series. There's no information that this is going to be part of a series, but it feels like it's setting up the universe and the history for a longer series. If I were going to write this, I would have done this book, and then my series would be 15-20 years later when this infant that they want to save is grown up, and then create the series around that
person's, I don't remember if it was a girl or a boy infant, it doesn't matter, they're babies, but create a series around that person. But this feels like an introduction to the magic system and the universe and just how things work. And that's what I took it as. If you want to go deeper into like a big fantasy series, this is not the place for you, but it was a really cool look at a world that I am now very, very much interested in. In the end, I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I'm gonna get into the next book. I did end up getting another arc, so there's gonna be at least 2 more books in this video, but I don't know which one I'm gonna read next, so you'll see in just a second. Alright, so the next arc that I read was the one that is not in the intro to this video, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. This one I just got approved for after I started filming this video, so it didn't make it into the intro, and I'm way too lazy to refilm that intro. So this is Su Lin Tan's debut novel, and it's based on Chinese mythology. It's a pretty long book. It's like 500, let's see, it's 512 pages, and if you've been around for a while, you might be familiar that I don't typically tend to like Chinese mythology, so I was a little skeptical going into this, but this is something that I could see possibly winning awards because of how popular it is as a debut. So I went ahead and requested it, and I actually liked this one for the most part. At least the thing about Chinese mythology that usually bothers me didn't exist in that book, and that is the existence of like fate or prophecy or destiny, where the characters don't tend to have free will and things just kind of magically fall into place because that is what their destiny is. This one, yeah, doesn't have any of that. And it may be because this follows Chinese gods and goddesses or immortals and not humans. So the gods and goddesses don't necessarily have a fate or a destiny. This follows the daughter of the moon goddess, and the moon goddess was a mortal who stole the elixir of immortality from the gods and became immortal. Her and her daughter, who she was pregnant with at the time, became immortal, and she was basically punished for her theft by being banished to the moon. No one's allowed to visit her. She just lives her mortality, or she lives her immortality alone on the moon, away from everybody else. And she is responsible for raising the moon every night. When she was punished, they didn't realize she was pregnant, and then her daughter was born and lived with her for many, many years in their solitude until the daughter's magic kind of formed, and then the other immortals notice that there's magic not from the moon goddess coming from the moon, and they go to investigate, and so the daughter has to flee. And she's dedicated her life to freeing her mother, and that's basically what this book is about, is how she goes about achieving greatness in order to free her mother. And as far as like the story and the plot of this book goes, it is fantastic. I loved the different trials and achievements that our main character went on to free her mother, basically. What I didn't like was the romance aspects. Our main character is very not like other girls, and she's plain and maybe a little bit ugly, but every man instantly falls in love with her, but she doesn't notice, because how could a man like her, somebody as ugly and plain and boring as her, that's pretty fucking annoying. And then there's like the typical young adult from 2010's love V, love triangle. It's a love V because it's two guys who like a girl. There's no triangular part. The guys don't like each other. They just both like her. So the typical love V, but I swear that this like romance, love V romance is the exact same romance that we got in Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. And let me tell you, that's not a good romance. But yeah, it was awful. The romance was like, literally, this book would have easily been 5 stars if it wasn't for that romance. And the romance was so bad, it knocked it down to a 3-star read. So, I do think this is a great story. And if you're interested in it, then I do recommend it, but please go into it knowing that you are going to have the most stereotypical bad YA romance from the 2010s. Anyway, next, and I think final arc for the month. Hello. So I have finished the last book, and that is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. And this one is different. Written differently, I should say. The story itself isn't too particularly weird, but the way it's told is weird. And this is... We're crooked, let me fix this. This is almost like a series of short stories told over about 100-year period, give or take. And it kind of follows different people, loosely connected people in the universe where a plague has been released from the permafrost in Siberia. And the plague does weird things that'll like transmute human organs into other organs, and so people are dying of this because if your like brain turns into a liver, then it doesn't function as a brain, or if your heart turns into your intestines, you don't have that blood flow anymore. So a lot of people it kills, a lot of people it'll make comatose. They don't really understand how it transmits. Originally, it was only transmitting through children, and a lot of children were dying. And then it eventually went to adults, mutated and started making adults sick. And they didn't think it was airborne. They were finding different things to cure it, but we're not really following the science of the, like, disease or anything like that. It's just little bits and little slices of everyday life of just people living in this universe. So you kind of know what's going on, but only through people who are just normal people, or even if they are like research scientists or whatever. We're not experiencing the research part of their life. We're just experiencing like random things. So there's a lot of commentary in this book. So we've got the commentary on like polarized caps melting, commentary on how society treats diseases, but we're also getting commentary on like assisted suicide, because apparently, I wouldn't know, but your organs changing into other organs is a very painful way to die. And especially when this is happening to children and they know there's no cure for it. You could get some organs transplanted, but not all of them. And so they have like a theme park where you take a dying child and let them have like the best day of their life, and then the last ride they go on is a roller coaster that the G-force gets so high after so many loops it kills them. So yeah, there's things like that in here. And then we also have like space exploration and aliens too. So it's a big conglomerate of very futuristic sci-fi, but also just people's everyday lives. It was really well told. There was only one chapter slash short story that I didn't particularly like, and that one was told in second person, and I don't like the you do this, you do that, you do that type of storytelling. That's just not my favorite. But like I said, all of these are short stories and they're just one chapter, so it wasn't like the worst thing ever. But it's just, while reading it, I thought I was going to give it a 3, but I can't stop thinking about it. So I think I'm going to up that 3 to a 4-star. And it's just an interesting experience. This one also reads really slow. It was only 300 something pages according to Goodreads, but it took me forever to read it. And I think it's just the way it's written. It's something you slow down and you enjoy. I think this would be very good story for people who only want to read like a tiny little bit every night, because this is very easily consumed where you're reading like a chapter and then going away and coming back. There's no repeat characters. You're not getting the same person's perspective in multiple stories. It's literally a different person, a different short story every single chapter. The people are loosely connected and you'll get like references to other characters you've already read like further along. And it's a wide range of personalities, characters, and events. So it's not all just like a normal person going to work like we'd assume. There's like chapters from people's in comas. There's chapters of people who are on a spaceship trying to colonize a new planet. There's a chapter from a researcher who is using pigs to grow replacement human organs, and one of the pigs develops the ability to talk. And then it does, the problem that I see in a lot of books like this is where it's not from the perspective of the researcher. You don't get any real answers. This one does give you answers in the final chapter. Everything comes together. You understand why all of this happened in the final chapter. There's nothing open-ended about it, but it doesn't really, as you're reading it, you don't think you're going to get answers. So it's not one of those books where you're trying to solve a mystery throughout, but it is one of those books that does give you answers, if that makes sense at all. I don't know if it does or not. Anyway, that was the final arc that I had this month. So we had 4 arcs, varying degrees of success, but for the most part, they were good. Let me know if after seeing this video, if you're going to pick up any of these, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.